now, it's a pleasure to welcome Gershon Baskin, negotiator in the Gilad Shalit Exchange and Middle East Director of International Communities Organization, joining us from Jerusalem. Gershon, thank you so much for joining us at this very difficult time in the country. It's World Children's Day. 38 children amongst the hostages being held by Hamas for more than 6 weeks now. It's unimaginable for the families. Also reports obviously around this deal in the pipeline, and many suggesting that Israel needs to be laying down the terms here. You know the situation all too well. What kind of insights can you share? How does Israel get all hostages safely home?
First of all, I think it's important for us to realize that Israel can't really lay down the terms here. We're really at the mercy of Hamas. It hurts me to say that, but we have very little leverage on the decision-making of Yahya Sinwar somewhere underground in Gaza. We have to insist that Hamas release all the women, all the children, all the elderly, the wounded, and the sick. At the minimum, that has to be the Israeli demand, and we have to insist that the United States and others apply extreme pressure on Qatar to force Hamas into a deal. But I'm even wary about whether or not Qatar has the ability to put pressure on Hamas, because I don't think the decisions are being made in Doha. I think they're being made in Gaza underground. And therefore, the Egyptian channel of negotiation seems to be much more important, where the Egyptians have much more direct contact with Hamas in Gaza and with Islamic Jihad, and that's where our attention needs to turn, I believe.
It also bears repeating, of course, that there was a ceasefire in place on the 6th of October. You made mention of the Egyptians. The Wall Street Journal is citing officials from Egypt saying that Israel is meticulously verifying a list of possible Palestinian prisoners to ensure none of them are connected to Hamas. Now, we need to reiterate this is a report, but what is your take on a deal that involves the release of Palestinian prisoners at this juncture?
Now, I think that the most important thing is to get hostages home as quickly as possible and as many as possible. Even at the risk of releasing Palestinian prisoners, I think that Israel can deal with them after the release of the hostages, after we manage to get all the hostages home that we can through search and rescue operations. The releasing of prisoners, of course, Israel has to maintain that certain prisoners who have created the most heinous crimes will not be released. But I think that Israel can release the women and children, prisoners under the age of 18. We can release prisoners who are above the age of 65 or 70 years old without taking risks. We need to look at the issue of bringing the hostages home and not so much the consequences of the immediate deal. The bizarre situation is that we're essentially negotiating with people that Israel intends to kill, which makes a very difficult and unusual negotiation.
And certainly we've seen the extent of the depravity and the brutality in terms of the Hamas massacre on the 7th of October. What are the concerns about even trusting any person or any entity right now in terms of making sure that the hostages that are alive stay alive as this deal is ironed out, so to speak?
We have no way of maintaining that, knowing that, and ensuring that. What we have to do is get them out of Gaza as soon as possible. When a deal is made, we will know that the deal is made. The government of Israel will vote for it and pass it, and then the third parties implementing the deal will get it to work. The International Red Cross, who will oversee the release of the hostages and the transferring, verifying their identity and transferring them. The same if any Palestinian prisoners are released from Israel, they will verify identity and make sure that the deal is done at the same time. The Egyptians on the ground at the Rafah crossing are essential. The Israelis will have to be ready with ambulances and buses and helicopters to transport Israelis who are released in the deal as soon as possible, as fast as possible. It's all very complex, but it needs to be done quickly because we have no idea how the hostages are, and every day that they're in Gaza endangers their lives.
It certainly is unfathomable to think it's been 6 weeks, more than that now, and the International Red Cross has yet to have access to these hostages, proof of life. As you say, medicines haven't been arranged as well. It certainly is very concerning. There are security experts raising concerns about the duration of a pause, a ceasefire, whatever term one wants to use, that it might give time for Hamas to regroup. Your take?
They will regroup. There's no doubt about it. Any pause, any ceasefire, the Hamas will use to reorganize, regroup, rearm themselves, whatever it might be. But we need to do that to facilitate the release of hostages. Israel will not stop the war. There is no scenario where this war ends with Hamas running Gaza still. Israel will go after the leaders, the political leaders and the military leaders and the commanders, and find the stockpiles of weapons and their infrastructure. And the Hamas ability to govern Gaza will no longer be there at the end of this war. There's no other scenario. We can take a pause for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever it's required to get hostages home, and then the war will resume.
Certainly is a very terrifying situation as it all unfolds on the ground. One more question, if you don't mind. We want to take a look at the day after Gaza. Many are suggesting the Palestinian Authority could have a role in Gaza. Joe Biden talking about a revitalized Palestinian Authority. We heard the rhetoric out of the PA talking about who really was behind the massacre on the 7th of October. It was stunning to hear such allegations when we know that Hamas actually filmed the atrocities themselves. Casting any doubt on who was behind it is just insane, frankly, for want of a better word. But given the clear stance out of Ramallah, how can the PA realistically be involved in a future role in terms of Gaza after the war? Your thoughts?
Look, the PA last time was elected in 2006. If there's one thing that almost every Palestinian agrees on is that they want new elections and they want to elect a legitimate leadership. Mahmoud Abbas, with all due respect, is in the 18th year of a 4-year term, and there's virtually no one in Palestine who supports him and his authority. There needs to be elections. There needs to be stabilization. There needs to be reform in the Palestinian Authority, fighting corruption and making sure that the Palestinian Authority is committed to a peace process with Israel. The international community needs to wrap its arms around the Palestinian issue and make sure that the Palestinians engage in free, fair, and open elections where there are guidelines for participation. No party which supports an armed struggle should be allowed to participate in those elections. And I think it's fair democratic countries put boundaries on who can participate in elections. The Palestinians need to lead the process, eventually control the Gaza Strip as well as the West Bank, and need to enter into a peace process which is based on a revitalized, viable two-state solution, because there is no other solution to the reality of 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Israeli Jews living on the territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. There is no one-state solution. We need to go back to the idea of a two-state solution and figure out how to make it work with all kinds of international guarantees, and based on the total lack of trust between the two parties, we need to negotiate intelligent agreements that have backstops and ability to move forward only once the parties implement the obligations that they take upon themselves.
Well, that certainly sounds a long way off right now. The focus on the hostages, and as we know, the families of these hostages will be meeting with the war cabinet a little bit later. We will be following all the developments, but we so appreciate your insights. Thank you very much for speaking to us here on I-24 News. Gershon Baskin, thank you very much for being here. Thank you.